Right now on Matter of Fact, unlocking family secrets. Tracking your family history online is more popular than ever. It's also leading to some surprising family reunions.
And she said, now we are cousins, and you either call me Martha or Cousin Martha. She won me over right there.
Are you ready to uncover the real roots of your family tree? Plus, you may love technology that lets you track how much you exercise or what you eat. But are you ready to let your boss keep track of you? And modern-day slavery. It's a billion-dollar criminal empire thriving in every state.
It's about profit. It's about exploiting the most vulnerable among us.
For the descendants of abolitionist Frederick Douglass, ending slavery is the legacy of their family's mission.
I'm Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact. More than 150 years after the 13th Amendment legally abolished slavery in America, it is still thriving in the form of human trafficking. It's hard to pinpoint an exact number because it often happens under the radar, but it is estimated that 20 to 40 million people worldwide are enslaved and exploited through sex and labor trafficking. In America, places like New York, LA, and Atlanta have high rates of human trafficking. According to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, in 2016, reported cases in the U.S. increased more than 35%. One of the most famous American abolitionists of the 19th century was Frederick Douglass. The former slave was born in Maryland 200 years ago this month. He was a famous orator, author, and confidant of Abraham Lincoln. Douglass's descendants say if he were alive today, he would be at the forefront of the fight to end human trafficking. His great-great-great-grandson is Kenneth Morris Jr., and he's the president and founder of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative. It's so nice to have you with us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Why sex trafficking as a civil rights issue to focus this family legacy, which is so powerful on? There's so many civil rights issues that I would think that you could pick.
In 2005, I came across a National Geographic magazine cover story entitled 21st Century Slaves. And when I looked at that headline, I reacted the way I think most people do the first time they hear about the existence of human trafficking. And I thought it had ended with the work of Frederick Douglass and the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. But as I started to research the issue, I found that slavery still existed everywhere around the world, including right here in the United States. When I looked at the legacy of Frederick Douglass as the great abolitionist, and then my great-great-grandfather, Booker T. Washington, as the great educator, if we combined their legacies, abolition through education, both of my ancestors understood from a very young age that education would be their pathway to freedom. And of course, it was illegal to teach an enslaved person to read and write, so they had to steal their education. So it was natural that we would go about trying to eradicate slavery today with education being at the foundation of the work.
I want to talk about education in just a moment, but first I'm really interested in talking about the international problem. There are plenty of people who think human trafficking or sex trafficking is not an American problem, but it is an American problem.
It's absolutely an American problem. Sex trafficking is an American problem as well as labor trafficking. And so we have young children that are forced into prostitution and forced into labor. And when you look at slavery today, there are many parallels to historic slavery. And when you boil down the basic elements of contemporary forms of slavery and historic slavery, it's about profit. It's about exploiting the most vulnerable among us. And we believe that we can reduce the vulnerability of young people to being trafficked by educating them on the signs and really unfitting them to be vulnerable to be enslaved.
There is legislation that was passed with bipartisan support in 2017. It's called the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Act. What does that legislation do, and do you think it goes far enough?
That was legislation that really guided the way the federal government addressed human trafficking internationally and domestically. The way human trafficking has been addressed over the past 20, 25 years is reactionary. It's reacting after the crime has been committed. It's reacting after the victimization has occurred. But if we don't start to put a little bit of effort toward prevention and preventing new victims from being spit into a cycle of exploitation that just churns. If we're just rescuing, restoring, and rehabilitating, as well-meaning as we are, we're complicit in allowing that cycle of exploitation to continue.
The statistics are terrible. 1 in 6 runaways are likely to be sex trafficked.
This is why it's important to have education in the classroom. Most people, when they hear about education around human trafficking, it's educating the public on the existence of human trafficking.
How to recognize people who might be trafficked.
We're talking about institutionalized knowledge in the classroom, and the natural question that we've always heard from students is, now that we know about historic slavery and contemporary slavery, what can we do about it? How can we become modern-day abolitionists?
Why not focus on those who use sex trafficked girls and boys? You know, because often you see, if in the best case scenarios, the actual traffickers are caught, but the people who exploit, who literally are the ones who are exploiting the young people, never really get punished. Partly they're hard to track down, but there's very little legislation as well to punish them.
Well, there are buyers and there are organizations that focus on reducing demand. Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And while organizations are doing great work to repair broken men, we believe that if we can not only talk to young kids about how to prevent them from being trafficked, but also talk to young boys about their attitudes and towards women and girls, and will they become a part of the problem or will they become a part of the solution? So by building strong children, we can reduce demand long-term and make sure that our kids are protected, engaged, and enlightened and educated. Ken
Morris is the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass and the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington. Thank you for coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
You bet.
Next on Matter of Fact, Frederick Douglass's legacy goes beyond ending modern slavery. How his passion for education is still inspiring young students.
Frederick Douglass was fighting for equal rights for everyone.
To combine art and history into a colorful lesson about equality. Plus, what would you do if you found out your family tree had some surprising roots? As millions use the internet to track their ancestry, meet one family who uncovered a secret past and turned it into a welcoming future for all their relatives.
When it comes to teaching students the hard history of slavery, a new report from the Southern Poverty Law Center finds that schools aren't doing a very good job. 2/3 of students don't know that it took a constitutional amendment to formally end slavery. Fewer than 1 in 4 students can correctly identify how provisions in the Constitution gave advantages to slaveholders. In Maryland, the birthplace of Frederick Douglass, they're working to change that. We sent our correspondent Diane Roberts to Baltimore to find out how.
On an overcast Saturday in Baltimore, we brought together 4 students from a local middle school, where 80% of their student body lives in poverty. We wanted to find out what these bright students really know about one of Maryland's most famous sons.
Frederick Douglass was fighting for equal rights for everyone.
These students learned lessons about abolitionist Frederick Douglass thanks to a school art project, Legacy, which looks at his lasting impact on education and society.
Blacks weren't supposed to be educated, but he decided he wanted to be, have the knowledge and be able to read, so he did it.
Their principle puts into perspective what history's heroes can mean to a generation.
Education can transform and can transcend your economic disparity, your life in general. It can change your future. For those kids who are born into a world where their future might be chosen for them, a good education can give them the option to choose their own path.
Words shaped Douglass, a writer, journalist, statesman, and they shaped the work of these 6th and 8th graders. Using Douglass's own words, they created vibrant visual expressions, poetic and poignant.
So some of the words we picked was free and hope, because Frederick Douglass showed all African Americans that there was hope.
Some men know the value of education by having it. I know the value of education by not having it.
Jalen, do you remember what you were feeling when you were putting together the artwork?
I was feeling inspired a kind of way, because A lot of people don't really pay attention too much about what he worked for, but it's nice that now we get to work and just remind everybody of what he did.
Frederick Douglass, in a small town of Ithaca, New York.
That same day, across town, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum was in full-on 200th anniversary celebration mode.
You just look at him, the way he just stares.
London Ladd, an illustrator and fan of the abolitionist, shared stories and lessons in creating personal visions of the man who stirred many into action.
All right, just make sure you guys got your drawing stuff. You got your Douglass pictures. What else about Douglass did you like about his facial features?
That hair.
Oh, you like his part in his hair?
Boy Scout Troop 7077 out of Prince George's County, Maryland, drank in Ladd's words, which blended with what they were already learning in the museum.
Look at that one.
And this one helped him spell, so I guess
Do you think Frederick Douglass is important in American history?
I say yes, because he tried to stop slavery, and he was just trying to change the world, or change America. I hope that racism will stop.
And perhaps that hope for the future is Frederick Douglass's greatest legacy. For Matter of Fact, in Baltimore, I'm Diane Roberts.
When we come back, millions of Americans are using at-home DNA kits to unlock clues about their ancestry. But what if your search uncovered old family secrets? Meet one family who decided to embrace their diverse family tree. Plus, is the key to fighting America's opioid epidemic changing the marketing message?
Purdue Pharma says it is cutting its sales force by more than half.
But will their new strategy to help really make a change?
With so many companies that will trace your DNA or family tree, genealogy has become a big business. According to one report, more people took genetic ancestry tests in 2017 than all previous years combined. And most of those were in the U.S., where people say they use the tests hoping to locate family members and distant cousins. The desire to know more about where we come from isn't new, and it isn't without some surprises. Just ask the Rand family. I first met them back in 2008, but their family tree and how they embrace the intertwining branches can provide an important lesson for everyone looking for their roots today. It's just after midnight in Houston, Texas. And the Rand family sets out for a family reunion. More than 300 Rands descend on the city of Atlanta.
We tell our children, when you have nobody, you have family.
65 and above, forward. Taller people, please work your way to the back.
At every reunion, a tradition, the family portrait. But there is a mystery surrounding the Rand family. A missing link that very few know about. Ruby Steen McGee is known as the family historian.
That is part one.
Everything she's learned over the years is recorded in these huge albums.
There she is.
From that, Ruby Steen was able to locate her great-great-grandfather in this cemetery. Buried here, William Harrison Rand, the patriarch of the family, and a white man. With this discovery, Ruby Steen's curiosity grew. She knew there had to be more. Using the internet, she traced the Rands back to London, England. They were a family of doctors and architects who came to Virginia in the mid-1700s and fought in the Revolutionary War. And according to these old documents, slave owners.
I used to hear them say that my great-grandfather, Harold Rand, was run out of North Carolina to Mississippi because he had a black woman living with him and his wife, and he came to Texas.
Here, Lodi, Texas. From old census records, Ruby Steen put together a family tree. William Rand fathered 7 children by his white wife, Sally, and 6 children
by his black mistress, Anne. Court documents show the two families lived close to each other. While little information exists about Anne's life, family members believe she was not a slave. Rubenstein's research led to an even more surprising discovery. Martha Hicks, also William Rand's great-great-granddaughter, and Rubenstein's white cousin.
A letter from this wonderful lady.
I said, "Dear Mrs. Hicks," and I went on to tell her that I was the great-great-granddaughter of William Harrison Hale Rand, and boy, did she really write me back.
What'd she write?
And she said, "Now we are cousins, and you either call me Martha or Cousin Martha." She won me over right there.
Have you met your black cousins?
Not yet.
That was about to change. 2 days later, we arranged for Martha, her husband Carl, and their granddaughter Natalie to meet their black cousins in Lodi.
What was that moment like?
I wanted to cry. I really did.
Before I met you, I wasn't sure if you were going to be excited about having black cousins. There are a lot of people who that would not be good news.
It would not have happened 40 years ago. I think we've made quite a bit of progress. It's an honor for us to be an example of progress.
Yes.
It is really
well put.
An honor.
Well put. There he is.
What a handsome guy.
The Rands, a heritage born from a family tree with black and white roots.
A Kodak moment.
Cousin Martha still attends the reunions and even visits with some of her newfound relatives throughout the year. She researched their genealogy further to find even more descendants on both the white and black sides of the family. The next Rand family reunion is next year in Houston.
Coming up next, State of Addiction. The fight against opioids gets a surprising new ally. What steps the pharmaceutical giant behind OxyContin is taking to keep their drug from being abused. And wearable technology is all the rage. While you might be willing to wear a wristband that tracks your fitness goals, would you dare to wear one that allows your boss to keep tabs on your work?
And now to our segment we like to call We're Paying Attention Even If You're Too Busy. A positive step in the nation's opioid epidemic is coming from the company that makes one of the most addictive drugs on the market, OxyContin. Purdue Pharma says it is cutting its sales force by more than half because it's no longer going to send sales reps to doctors' offices to promote the drug. The move comes as Purdue and other drug companies are facing hundreds of lawsuits for deceptive marketing. They're accused of aggressively pushing opioids, downplaying the risk of addiction, and overstating its benefits. But while most say it's a step in the right direction, lawmakers like Senator Claire McCaskill say pharmaceutical companies still have a lot of work to do. She released a Senate report that says 5 drug makers, including Purdue, paid nearly $10 million over 5 years to patient advocacy groups and doctors to promote OxyContin. Opioid overdoses kill more than 100 people every day in America. And in 2016, opioids were involved in the fatal overdoses of more than 42,000 people.
When we return, industrial efficiency or an invasion of privacy. The debate surrounding Amazon's newest wearable technology. We want to know, would you wear it?
Amazon has won a pair of patents for wireless wristbands, but it's not the wearable tech you're probably thinking about. This is for Amazon's warehouse workers. It'll track them to see if they're putting their hands in the right places. The concept relies on ultrasonic pulses or radio transmissions to detect the position of a worker's hand in relation to inventory bins. If they're moving toward the wrong direction, the wristband will buzz and then direct them to the right spot. Innovative? Or is it a way for management to spy on workers? Amazon has relied on technology to boost efficiency in employee operations by experimenting with delivery drones and with Amazon Go. It's that convenience store without cashiers that lets customers scan their phones to check out. Privacy advocates say the wristbands will let management conduct workplace surveillance. Amazon says speculation about the wristbands is misguided. and that workers around the world use handheld scanners to check inventory and fulfill orders. They say using a wristband would free up the hands of workers and their eyes, too, improving accuracy. We'll see. I'm Soledad O'Brien. We'll see you back here next week for Matter of Fact.